Welcome back to our ongoing discussions in the philosophy of religion. Today we talk about omni-properties and paradoxes associated with them. There are interesting issues for nearly any omni-property, but the ones that we're going to focus on today and in future discussions are the problems and the paradoxes that surround omniscience and omnipotence. Other omni-properties include omnipresence and omnibenevolence. Omnibenevolence we've already focused on when we talked about the problem of evil, though there are interesting other problems with omnibenevolence that you are free to explore on your own, but we're not going to talk about them much. The most interesting one is the conflict between divine freedom and omnibenevolence. So omnibenevolence is supposed to be something about the perfection of God's goodness. If God is perfectly good, however, it looks like there will be a limitation with respect to God's freedom. What does freedom involve? Freedom looks like it involves choices. Choices between what? Well, sometimes you have choices between permissible outcomes, like, for example, which school you go to get your undergraduate training. Maybe you chose WashU, but you could have chosen some lesser school, or maybe even some more illustrious school. You had choices. Neither choice would count as doing something impermissible. If God is perfectly free, presumably God has choices as well, and creation itself is typically thought of as a voluntary act on the part of God. How are such choices compatible with omnibenevolence, though? Perfect goodness. It looks like any choice available to God would have to be a permissible choice. In that case, it looks like the kind of freedom God possesses is slightly different from, perhaps weaker than the kind of freedom we possess, because we're capable not only of choosing between permissible options, but also choosing the impermissible. One of the early problems with the notion of omnipotence is the question of whether God can sin. Of course, if God can sin, that undermines a certain conception of omnibenevolence. It doesn't undermine perfect goodness in one straightforward sense. If perfect goodness is God just never does anything that's wrong or impermissible, the ability to do something that's wrong or impermissible doesn't imply that you actually do something that's wrong or impermissible. So maybe the mere possibility of doing something wrong is compatible with God's perfect goodness, if perfect goodness doesn't require the inability to do something that's wrong, but rather only the failure to do something that's wrong. This is the view, by the way, of Richard Swinburne, that God has certain abilities that go unrealized because he's perfectly good. In that case, the question, can God sin, gets a positive answer. Yes. God just won't sin. God just wouldn't sin. Something like that, both of which are compatible with having the ability to sin, but just never actualizing it. So there are issues about the relationship between omnibenevolence and omnipotence, as well as between omnibenevolence and perfect freedom.